For joining. It's one of our series that we started doing the last couple of weeks. We want to create some more discussion with the community regarding certain technologies. Um, and we didn't want to also make it a lot of presentation heavy and things like that. So me and also I see a lot of my colleagues, we are here to answer questions that you might have regarding Prometheus, how to set it up properly, production grade setup or configuration setup, things like that, that you might have encountered so far in your daily job, or you're interested in Prometheus and you want to get some more insights about it. So we are here to answer questions that you may have, also from our personal experience, and I hope we can create a nice discussion. So also others, if you want to, I'd like to keep it open for everyone to give their 2 cents as well, if they have experience with Prometheus. Don't want to just be me talking here. So yeah, since we can start, who wants to start with a question or start with maybe yeah, the experience with Prometheus so far? You can unmute yourself and we can start discussing. Any first brave people?
How much experience, how many years or months experience do you actually have, and
Yeah,
how did you get excited when you saw it, how it works?
cool. Great question to start, I think. So Prometheus has been with us since 2012. Well, almost 8 years now. Okay, but it was not since Kubernetes that actually it started to really evolve as a technology. So around 2015 and 16, and it's not even the last couple of years that it started actually addressing some of the bigger issues when it comes to multi-clusters and federation and things like that. Personally, I've set up Prometheus in 3 different cases for production in the span of the last 3 to 4 years. So only after the Kubernetes era, not before that. Um, so yeah, how I got excited personally. Well, Prometheus has what I really liked about Prometheus is it uses probably that it uses the pool model, right? So many tools nowadays or at least in the last few years, they were using the push model, which is your application or your service needs to push metrics or need to push everything. Well, Prometheus is using the other way around. It's using a pull model, which actually always polls for metrics. So as long as your application has an endpoint or several endpoints, you don't have to worry to push your stuff always to your monitoring system. This was very interesting for me in the last, well, 3-4 years ago, because there were not systems like that in the market. And I think that's still one of the main powers of Prometheus. This whole model of just not worrying about pushing anything, you just opening your endpoint, and could be custom, could be one of the ones that are standardized, and you still have all your monitoring of your time series data in a very reliable way. Yeah. What do you like about Prometheus, Victor?
I wish I could tell you more. Didn't get the chance to use it too much. I think the setup is quite nice and easy.
Mm-hmm.
And then getting into like customizing and everything, I think it's a bit advanced. So I think you need to know what you're doing, and possibly more time spending on this could help. But I think the initial start is really easy. I liked it when I was doing some stuff with that. So in terms of you're basically enabling the endpoint for data scraping, or how we can call it. Are you aware of any vulnerabilities which open up once you do that on the endpoint? Because obviously you want to have as least as possible stuff running, for example, on the endpoints, and by running something which is available on HTTP.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a massive hole for vulnerabilities, or are you aware of any?
You mean vulnerabilities in the sense that you can manipulate the endpoints and use it for other stuff?
Well, it's possibly using that as access for the bad guys.
Yep.
Through that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is a problem there in the sense that Prometheus, one of the weak points of Prometheus is user management. So unless you have other stuff around it, by default, natively, user management is not a strong point of Prometheus. So everything is still over HTTP. So you need to be careful of that. On the other hand, Prometheus is built and designed to be isolated in a sense that it can be a standalone server somewhere else, not connected to your network. It can only communicate via specific routes, for example. It doesn't have to be part of your whole setup, or it can still be up and running and reliable even if your I don't know, NFS goes down, things like this. So it's not relying on shared things to run. That's one of the things that you could treat it more in an isolated space. But yeah, you need to be careful about how you set up the endpoints and how you scrape data. Uh, but I wouldn't say it's so vulnerable. But on the end of the day, it's just metrics in this day, right? So you're just exposing metrics. You don't have access to anything else. Just scraping data. Then the question is, how do you want to keep this data? How do you create the retention policies and things like that, which is a different story. But yeah, I would say you need some careful, but I haven't seen really a lot of manipulation attempts or something. It's just metrics. You cannot really get anything else from Prometheus. If you don't expose the endpoint, you cannot talk to the services, right? So that's fine, at least in my experience.
On the production setup, hello first, David
Hey.
from Echo, one of the CS clients, I would say.
From Echo. Hi.
Yes, from Echo. So on your experience with setting up in production Prometheus, did you do it as a central place or did you do it per cluster?
Great question. So it always depends on really the requirements. If we're talking about single clusters, which was a more frequent case a couple of years ago, so no federation or no multi-cluster setups, then the way we would do this then is with pure Kubernetes objects. You have the proper service accounts and everything, and then you have to decide on deployment or stateful sets. However, that has become, 2 years ago it was fine. Nowadays this has become a bit obsolete. Nowadays, if I would set up today in production, I would definitely make use of the Prometheus operator, which is still going beta, but it still provides high availability, which was not available 1 year ago. You could not have a highly available setup for Prometheus, which was a problem for production and a risk. Nowadays, you could use the Prometheus setup for highly available Prometheus operator for highly available setup for your Prometheus service and alert manager. Now, if we're talking about multi-cluster, which is where the discussion becomes interesting, multi-cluster setup is still not possible with just Prometheus. Prometheus is actually built to run just a single service on a single server, and it's not built for replication or having failovers and things like that. It's not built for this. So there are a couple of open source tools that helps you now with these use cases, which become more and more important nowadays. One of them is Cortex, and the other one is Thanos. Both of them are aiming to make Prometheus multi-cluster friendly and enable federation. They have similar goals. They have similar advantages and disadvantages. They're just different in the way they do things. One of them is a pull model, and the other one is a push model. So it's a more centralized approach. We could go into details with this, but if we were talking about the multi-cluster setup, meaning that I have 5 production clusters that I want to centralize monitoring, that could be a use case. Then we would need to go with Prometheus alongside with one of those tools. Otherwise, Prometheus could not do it by itself, or it would be super hard to hack it into to do this. For single clusters, for a dev environment or for a test environment that you don't really need multi-cluster setup, you can still use the operators, which will allow you for high availability. But yeah, a couple of years ago, that was one of the risks. That's why now Prometheus has started to, well, last year or so, has started to ramp up, and it's being used by many big companies. 2-3 years ago, people were still considering production use because they could not have failover, and if the server is down, you don't have monitoring, right? But now these problems are being tackled. Yeah, from my experience.
Did you find it very complex to set up the operator in a centralized place with Cortex or?
Well, complex. So I've had this use case once only because Cortex and Thanos is just 1 year old. It's very new technology. Complex. Let's say it was more complex to set up Prometheus before that rather than after this. Both open source tools, they're very well built even from the beginning. They're also built in Go. They're quite flexible. There's good community behind it. It was not complex to set it up. However, a lot of things are still not production grade in terms of maturity. So there were some things that still we needed to go around or create some workarounds. But for the most part, it was not that complicated. Just needed a very, very, very careful design before we actually implement, because centralizing your monitoring, it's important and great, and we all, the people that at least will work more with the infrastructure side of things, we really like it. But also we need to be very careful on how to set it up, because then if that has problems, then a lot of clusters will have problems. So we just needed to spend a lot of time on the design part and how we architect the whole thing. Implementation wise, it was not as complicated as I expected. But still, I'm expecting more maturity in the next year or so for both of these tools when it comes to that. It's still quite new, I would say.
Thank you.
No problem.
What do you think of biggest competitors of Prometheus? Like, is there any
Yeah, there are
similar
competitors.
type?
Yeah, the main competitor that I've seen is InfluxDB. InfluxDB is doing a similar thing. And actually, I'm working now with a client that they're using, instead of Prometheus, InfluxDB, just because they started with it 3 years ago. But now they're moving to Prometheus. So I can see how InfluxDB could be considered a good competitor. The difference again here is the pull versus push model. So InfluxDB is a push model. You actually have to push your metrics to InfluxDB server. If you don't, InfluxDB will not care. Whereas in Prometheus, you just enable an endpoint and that's it. So it's just a different design. Performance-wise, InfluxDB is also good. Prometheus, I would say, treats the PromQL, the query language that Prometheus has, feels a bit more intuitive, easy to use than InfluxDB. But yeah, they are very similar. I would say they are good competitors. It's just a matter of what you really want to do. Prometheus is more reliable in terms of setup. InfluxDB, however, could do highly available setup easier. So it's pros and cons. So yeah, that could be another competitor. I would still go for Prometheus personally, but I've seen it as another solid choice.
Thank you.
No worries. Great question so far. Any more? Who wants to go next? Could be also from our guys. Also Mircha and Michiel, Charlotte, Rafael, I see. A lot of people from CS here.
Most of the times when you deploy Prometheus, you pair it with Grafana or some alert monitoring tool.
Yeah.
Did you encounter any setups where this wouldn't be the case, where you would just have Prometheus and you would still make it useful?
No. So one of the things that Prometheus does not aim to solve is your dashboarding. It has a UI, probably you all have seen it. It's not very pretty. It's not very usable. That's not the intention that they provide also a dashboarding solution. That's why even when you see the Helm charts of Prometheus or the operator, or even Cube Prometheus, which is a new project that tries to bundle all the important components of the ecosystem of Prometheus, always Grafana is there. Grafana itself has made a lot of effort to incorporate Prometheus as much as they can, because the idea is Prometheus just tries to do the time series monitoring as best as it can. This is where its power is, and they try to use other tools to, let's say, to fill the gaps. So I've actually, even I would say Prometheus without Grafana or without the dashboarding solution would not make really any sense, or would be not that usable even, because you cannot really get the power of all the histograms and all the time series things, operations you can do. But on the other side, they're very well incorporated, so it's very easy to set up both of them together. They pretty much go together. So I would see it as a whole ecosystem that you deploy, not just only a Prometheus server and then another tool. But yeah, I haven't seen any case that Prometheus could work without a proper dashboarding solution. Yeah.
There was
Hey, Andreas. Yeah, there's a question in the chat.
We have a question in the chat before you guys continue from Tom. Tom, by the way, you can also say it out loud, but I will read it for you. So Tom asks, how do you manage Alert Manager when you have a lot of rules? Yes, so very good question as well. So for those that they don't know, Alert Manager is considered one of the basic components of Prometheus itself, although it's a different service. And it's basically it's in the name, to give you alerts about things that go wrong. So of course you can end up with a lot of rules and a lot of different granularity of alerts, severe or things like warnings, things like that. How do you manage all this? I would say in a declarative way makes it way easier. So that's why I said, especially after Kubernetes came into play, Prometheus also had a huge increase in its capabilities, because the way we had set up also alerts is always via YAMLs, right? So you have everything in a declarative way, you have all your rules and alerts in a declarative way, and you always, with a Prometheus operator especially, the Prometheus operator will try to keep everything updated, right? So you change an alert, you don't have to do anything, you know that it will be updated in the alert manager. So the management of all those becomes way easier if you start using the Prometheus operator. And even if you don't want to do that, at least having it in a declarative way in YAMLs, that will give you better clarity of what is happening. Otherwise, I can agree, if you're just going and register rules by yourself in the manager, then it just becomes too big to handle, especially when you're going to multi-cluster setups, or if you're deploying microservices in the hundreds of in the cluster. Yeah, that's how I've tried to manage in the last couple of years at least. Anyone else want to add anything to that? Their experience with Alert Manager and the rules?
Yeah, maybe I can.
Yeah.
Let me see. Oh yeah. So when I wanted to have alerts implemented, I chose to with a team at a previous client. We used the Grafana alerts mainly because we could integrate it with Telegram, for instance, and it would always also give like the graph. So we didn't really use the alert manager because then. Yeah, with Grafana, it gave a better insight of what was actually going on, and you could also see like the history of the metric that was alerting, for instance. Other than that, I'm interested whether people think that there is maybe cons and pros that I'm missing, that we were missing because we didn't use the alert manager. Like, is there stuff that why you would choose Prometheus Alert Manager over the Grafana one?
For me, it's two things why I would probably do that. The first thing is that you're not relying on Grafana also for your alerts, right? So you try to separate the concerns. So your alert manager, which is important to have, alerts about things going wrong, even if your dashboard is not working, if Grafana database is down, you still get the alert. That would be the first thing for me. The second thing is actually three things. The second thing is that you can have highly available setup even in Alert Manager. you cannot really have this in Grafana, which means that you're very you can make very stable and reliable your alert functionality. And thirdly is that Alert Manager provides way more granularity in the alerts you want to create and maintain, because it's built for that, right? So you can actually really have fine-grained alerts, and you can really control the way you want to alert different people or different departments, or get warnings about different metrics, things like that. But depends on the requirements, right? Sometimes could be that you don't want to have all this granularity, so then maybe Grafana would work, right? It doesn't mean that one is correct, but I would choose Alert Manager if I was in a bigger setup with a lot of clusters, that I need highly available setup, that I need a lot of fine-grained alerts. I would say that.
Makes complete sense. Those were not our requirements back then at that client, but yeah, cool.
Nice.
And can you also integrate it with probably you can with Slack or with Telegram, for instance? Yeah. Okay.
Slack, Microsoft Teams, even now Slack and Teams.
Wow.
Yeah, Telegram. You can integrate with pretty much everything you want as well. Yeah, it is a good tool. Also, it doesn't look very nice. I mean, it's UI wise, but it works.
Yeah.
It works nicely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd say that are sort of pitfalls or hidden challenges with setting it up that newbies should be aware of?
For the setup.
Yeah, or usage.
Yeah. So let's say one pitfall, not pitfall, but one thing that I always try to clarify to especially people that they want to start using Prometheus is about what is really Prometheus solving, right? So Prometheus solving, it's a time series data modeling tool, a monitoring system, and that's its core functionality. What it doesn't do well yet is logging, for example, right? So Prometheus, you can see it. I also set it up a few times alongside with a logging tool like Kibana with Elasticsearch or something like that. So when you're setting up Prometheus, be mindful of that you probably have to also link some other parts that they're missing from a full observability solution. Now they have Loki as well, which is another, it's a logging capability from Grafana Labs, which they try to integrate the same as Grafana, as they do with Grafana. For setting up Prometheus, a key question that you need to answer before you set it up, and I'm not talking now about the operators or just pure Prometheus, is, and that's a frequent question, if you will deploy Prometheus server as a deployment in Kubernetes or stateful set. And I've seen very split opinions here and very split cases here. It's not that the one is clearly better than the other, but it's a very important choice, that part. Deployment, and it goes back to Kubernetes, this choice. If you really want your persistent storage to not be shared with other pods, then you go with stateful set, it's always there. Or if you want to keep more flexible the server so you can leverage more Kubernetes power, so you go with deployment. This is a choice that I've seen a lot of times being a discussion point and dragging the implementation because people are scared to not put it in a stateful set. But actually the recommendation even from CNCF and the Helm charts that you'll see is doing with the deployment. So that's something that needs to be carefully thought in the beginning. Other than that, it's also how you configure really Prometheus, how often you scrape targets, what are your resources, or where do you deploy Prometheus, how big of machines. Scaling should be also be taken into consideration because Prometheus cannot scale very well. So you need to be aware of how many data are you going to scrape, how many applications are going to be running there. So to allow for all that. And then it's really about connecting with the other applications. So setting it up, even just using the Helm charts, straightforward. It's not hard. Even if you want to deploy the operator, will be probably in 5 minutes, you'll have it deployed. Configuring Prometheus after that for production, you need to be more careful on how you want to do this. Try to anticipate how many data you will actually have to scrape and accommodate for high availability, how do you do storage? Because Prometheus, it doesn't provide, it's not strong in this area. It's not strong in persisting storage. So you need to really think hard about how you do that in a reliable way. And then Prometheus should also be part of a bigger monitoring solution, right? So it can do most of the monitoring, but like I said, the dashboarding and the logging, this needs to be accommodated by Grafana and something else, right? So you create a whole ecosystem around it. So the challenge, I would say, is syncing all those up, configuring Prometheus, depending also on the workloads that you can expect, and also taking care of high availability. And eventually, if that's a requirement, multi-cluster setup, because then it becomes even more complicated. But yeah, just setting it up, I think Victor said it also in the beginning, it's super easy. The configuration is the hard part.
Okay, thanks, Andreas. For the scaling, you said it doesn't scale well. Does that mean at some point after a certain amount of metrics or a certain amount of data, you'd want to add another instance, or how would you do that?
Right, so it doesn't scale well in a sense, indeed, that a Prometheus server is supposed to be a server in a single box, to put it simply. And that's one of the main reasons that the people created the operator. An operator, the Prometheus operator has a CRD, which is another Prometheus instance. So you need another Prometheus instance. You say to the operator, create one, and it will create one and copy the configuration and everything. So this is one of a very good use case why you would need probably the operator, because otherwise you indeed had to set up a new server of Prometheus in another, another instance, or try to scale it. But then that's what I mean, it doesn't scale well, because if you try to scale it by, I don't know, increasing the replicas of server, you're gonna have a lot of issues with redundancy and scraping being mixed up. So actually you need to set up a new server, make sure that it's scraping different metrics, for example. Yeah, so in this case, I would definitely go with the operator if you cannot really set up a stable Prometheus setup and you're confident that it can handle all the load, because then you can add more instances that can create different metrics. And there you can have different topologies. There is, I will not go into too heavy details about this, but there are two main topologies with having multiple Prometheus servers. There is one that you have a lot of low-level Prometheus servers, and you have a few high-level Prometheus servers that they scrape selectively a few of those servers. And the high-level ones are the ones reporting the metrics. So you kind of like get everything you need, and then you organize it and you send things when you need to send them, or you do it then in pairs. That's the second topology. You have one server selectively communicating with another server. Just try to imitate kind of replication so you can scale better. But it's hard. It's not easy. Yeah, that's why, and the operator has became a priority to be developed, because yeah, we're reaching a point that we need to scale with Prometheus instances, and it's not easy or straightforward. Yeah, that's from what I've seen, at least. So, any other questions? Who here actually is using Prometheus in production? Just out of curiosity. No one?
Maybe pre-production.
Pre-production, Eric. Okay. Why pre-production and not production?
Kind of being set up from scratch and all that. So needs a bit of testing.
Okay. And how are you setting it up in pre-production?
So currently, I don't have the whole view of it,
Okay.
but we just want to set up some normal alerting for Prometheus, and I was kind of stuck between using the Grafana alert, or kind of actually getting into Prometheus alerting. So that was kind of my biggest issue right now.
Mm-hmm.
because the Grafana alerting seems quite simple and
Yeah.
kind of the easy way out. But
Yeah.
of this. But yeah.
Okay, makes sense. And then you're setting it up in Kubernetes? I mean, the Prometheus itself, or is it in a, you know?
I think the setup is on Kubernetes, I think. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think another issue we faced was, I think Roman can also ask about it, was having to use the IP address to set up a receiver for metrics. I don't know, maybe
Exporter?
Roman can more on that.
You're trying to create an exporter or something like
Roman?
that? Hey, Roman, don't be so silent.
Oh, he lost our window.
Yeah, it's so annoying to find this stupid unmute button. I have actually, there is a button. There is a shortcut for that. Now
Okay.
we have the issue now is that we don't have access to data store configuration.
Mhm.
So, and we need to get some stuff from Microsoft SQL database. And,
Okay.
yeah, we don't have data store. So I was thinking maybe there's like a way to go around it and then just use some exporter which runs queries and then sends those queries.
Yeah, so and that's also a remark from Tom in the chat, who also he says he's also using the HTTP exporter to get metrics. So that's maybe a good chance to discuss about exporters. And
Yeah.
I know people here, they like Michiel has already created exporters for Prometheus in the past. So for those that they don't know, right? So like I mentioned before, Prometheus is a pool model. So you open an endpoint and then you get the metrics. But of course, there are some exporters out there, or there are some Prometheus, Prometheus exporters that you can use, that they don't cover every use case. So sometimes you have to create your own, you write actually your own Prometheus exporter that then sends the metrics to Prometheus, right? And this is also what Roman was saying, that they have a problem, they need to access data store. I don't know if you guys looked at an existing Prometheus exporters from Microsoft's SQL. I don't know if they exist, but I would guess they probably are. They do exist. If not, then yeah, the way forward will be to create your own exporter so you can get the metrics you want. Michiel, maybe you can share with the group the experience you have with writing exporters. I think that will be valuable.
Yeah, so yeah, like you say, one of the things that why I really like Prometheus is because you can relatively easily write your own exporter. There's plenty you can do it in Python or Golang. Especially with Golang, you can make like really small images because it's relatively simple. You need not every application that you have, for instance, provides a metrics endpoint. And if they do, then usually it's about the performance of the application, but not a lot about the sometimes the metrics that you are interested in. So one of the ways I used it at a previous client with my team was we were building this sort of CI/CD platform, let's say, for the client. And other than the metrics, the general ones, where you need to monitor the system and the applications and see if everything is working, the web server, for instance, we were interested in getting the adoption metric. So by how many people was the platform used, and how many people kept on using our platform. So for instance, for GitLab, we were monitoring the amount of teams every day or every few seconds, basically, so that every week we could show like the success of our platform, because that's the only way you need to measure something to see if it's successful. And often with a lot of applications, you are able to get the data, but not maybe from the metrics endpoint, but via API requests. And writing a Prometheus exporter, which then it's just a sort of Python script that does some API calls, gets some data, and then presents it at an endpoint in the Prometheus way. And you don't need to do a lot for that. It's another library from provided by Prometheus, and yeah, that allowed us to actually get a metrics on the adoption, which was super useful, because then we could see like, okay, this, when we started, we had maybe 10 users, but after a couple of months, we had like 500 users within that enterprise client, and that therefore we could show our added value.
Yeah.
Especially for systems that don't directly show value, like CI/CD platforms.
Yeah, exactly. Apart from the normal metrics that everyone is interested in, you sometimes have more fine-grained metrics, and then writing an exporter is the way to go. Cool. Yeah, that would make sense. So Roman, maybe you can take a look at some exporters. Do you have?
Yeah, a lot of them are open source.
I was, but I like what you said, that you can just do like a small Python thing. This I can do. Maybe because what I basically need to do is just make Prometheus run some SQL queries, and I mean I can do it locally on the machine because I have access to this server, and if maybe it's even better if I run them locally, and then I just export the metrics instead of making Prometheus accessing the machine somehow, because then I need to set up access for it. Right.
So yeah, I think you can write an exporter, which you could see as like a separate application that is run inside a container that then has access and then provides the endpoint to Prometheus. So Prometheus is talking to your exporter, and your exporter could be, for instance, a sidecar or a side pod, or it could be a separate pod in itself that has access towards your database then.
Yeah, usually you can see more the topology of running as a sidecar in alongside another pod, another application, and that is fetching the metrics.
Well,
also,
my database is on EC2 instance. It's like Windows machine with Windows database.
Yeah.
Okay, you could also on that machine run an exporter process.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Right now we're running Telegraph, but nothing stops me from making my own, at least for now, something custom which can run the SQL queries locally and then just export those metrics.
Yeah,
actually makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has anyone else written their own exporters, or maybe you guys can share your experience with using exporters with Prometheus? That's an interesting topic because it's something that is it's not that hard to do, but it's also necessary. So it's good if we can share more of that, or anything else that you would like to discuss around these topics. See, we have 19 people.
So I see that Tom Kerr said in the chat that he's using the HTTP black box exporter. I've used that as well. It's a very nice exporter that just checks your web server for the type of response that it gets. So as long as it's a 200, you're fine.
Yeah.
I'd like to, if possible, Tom, could you share some of your experiences so far with that exporter? Was it easy, or did you encounter some challenges? Maybe. Okay. Yeah, well, I can share my experience. I found it relatively easy and a very useful little tool that can monitor your uptime. Sometimes it's hard to monitor your uptime because if you do it on your own application cannot monitor its own uptime usually, because when it's down, it doesn't send any response. So you need like a separate thing that can view your application or your web server.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's see, but it works really well. It's set up, and we're using it for monitoring uptime as a self-cert expiry. Ah, cool.
Yeah. There's
Exactly.
there's hundreds, I think, exporters at the moment that you could already make use of. Like Michiel said, they're open source as well, so it's an extensible framework. Basically, Prometheus has become an extensible framework. There are still challenges in setting it up properly, and especially when we're talking about multi-cluster setup. I'm curious to see if any of you has this need that you want to monitor multiple clusters with Prometheus, because this is where actually things become quite challenging. It's not impossible, but it needs proper design and proper discussions and requirements at the starting. A question that I get often as well is, how should I then monitor Prometheus itself? Right, so you have Prometheus running. Yeah, how do you monitor Prometheus itself? Does anyone have any insight about that or an idea?
Get an engineer to look at it all day long.
Well, yeah.
The old way.
The old way. That's a way. But has anyone encountered this case or thought about it? Right. That's another about Prometheus, right? So you have a monitoring system. Who monitors the monitoring system? And I've seen cases in past clients that they had another tool to monitor that tool, and that becomes then an endless, monitoring tool after tool discussion. Well, the interesting part is actually that Prometheus can monitor itself as well, right? Of course, if it's down, someone needs to go take a look, but it can monitor itself as well. It monitors everything with proper endpoints, and it has its own endpoints, so actually it can monitor itself. Hey, Ian.
Hey.
Raising hand.
I just wanted to jump in, hopefully with some helpful anecdotes. So yeah, we had this conversation yesterday with my client. We are trying to get a monitoring capability within the team. So we started simple by setting up Prometheus, Grafana, and so on. But one of the things we discussed was should we connect it up with Istio or not? And the question was, if Istio goes down, the mutual TLS goes down, we have no monitoring. Is this acceptable? So I'd be interested in your view, number one, on that.
Connecting it with Istio.
Well, so actually, number two, what I was going to say was that we use CloudWatch to monitor the infrastructure itself. Yeah. So we have this sort of two-level monitoring concept.
Yeah, certainly I probably wouldn't link it with Istio. I was seeing cases that, Prometheus, especially when you're talking about production clusters, is the thing that needs to be stable and reliable as much as possible. I don't see a lot of benefits with connecting it with Istio. I usually keep it quite separate. I sometimes even keep it in a separate network, in a separate, quite separate setup, exactly because you don't want your monitoring system to go down. But I'm curious also about Istio. You're using it in production yet? So are you? How are you using Istio in that case? Is it more about mutual TLS, or are you actually using more things?
Charlotte's actually much closer to this, but yeah, mutual TLS, network policies, egress, ingress, all that stuff. Sorry, I'm eating, having breakfast. But yeah, actually, we came to the decision yesterday, maybe we reverse it, but we came to the decision that it's an acceptable risk. Okay. If Istio is down, monitoring's down, this is okay. The other concern was security. So some people who care about security really care about data being leaked, about nodes, about system level information which hackers may use to gather intelligence about the system. There was also the argument about, well, let's it's simpler if everything is under Istio. Because it's simpler to manage. We don't have to. We were talking about having 2 ingresses instead of just one, encrypted and unencrypted. Then you have to manage this. Then you have to think about this. To an extent, I think we're feeling our way with this. What's the best practice? What's not? And maybe in the short term, simpler is better than not so simple. But it's interesting that your instinct, maybe your experience, I don't know, is to separate them completely.
Yeah. So also depends on how you will set up Prometheus itself, right? So having also high availability, if it's possible, that would help a lot. Of course, yeah, if you connect with Istio and then Istio is down, you're gonna have problems anyway. Other topologies are that you have the main Prometheus highly available, connected to everything, but you also have kind of a secondary setup. If you're not using highly available, actually a secondary server, which actually is not connected and then scrapes only the things that you need to scrape. So in case everything goes down, at least you have the failover Prometheus working, which is separate, and it only scrapes things that are super important to know, not everything. This is also something that I've seen in the past. It's not has also its downsides, but you can have a level of confidence that, okay, if it goes down, which shouldn't, but if, at least there is something that I can monitor. Maybe not the whole thing, but some important things. That could also be something to consider. It needs some custom work. It's not out of the box, but there are, because people needed that in the past, there are some topologies you can use on having some failover Prometheus if you're not using the operator. The operator otherwise then would make it even easier if you're even with Istio, because then you do have high availability, you do have a management level above that you can actually do things. But yeah, it's not, it depends also on the requirements, right? So it's not always what you need to do. The point is that Prometheus is built to be stable and standalone by itself. It's designed to be not dependent on your network or your network storage and things like that. Of course, you can still do these things, but its power shines when it's not connected there. So yeah, I think it's, you guys can see how it goes. I also don't know really the requirements, but I would think of ways that you can have kind of like highly available setup at least. So in case something goes down, that you can have a secondary fallback scenario. But yeah, and yeah, like Tomislav says, monitorception. Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting point. That's interesting, Ian. Thanks for sharing. It's interesting use case.
Thank you.
Cool. More interesting
questions, because otherwise I would have asked it.
Yeah.
David is working with me at Echo.
Yeah, he shared that in the beginning of the call. You got any more questions there, David, about all that?
I got loads of questions, but most of them are because of my lack of experience with these tools. So basically, we started enabling monitoring from Istio, just some simple labels, some simple things, and then when we moved into configuring it ourselves on a separate, let's say behind a reverse proxy, it started to get messy, started to get loads of errors, loads of configurations to be done. So exactly as I think Victor said at the beginning, it's easy to set up as default, but then hard to go into configuring it.
Yeah, exactly. And it will require some challenge, some effort to be put there. My experience is that it's worth at the end, so I would keep on trying. It really solves a lot of problems, and setting it up properly can also provide a very good overview of what is happening in terms of metrics, right? That's also the always thing to keep in mind. It's about metrics. It's not logs or something. It's about metrics. Yeah.
So you would recommend the deployment through a Helm chart?
Yes. I mean, if you're just going to use pure Prometheus without operators and stuff, like a server along with the metric server and the cube state metrics and the node exporters and Grafana and stuff, I would use a Helm chart. It's very, very mature. It's very well built. I've used it also in the past. You could still create your own deployments if you want, but I don't see really the benefit. The Helm charts are pretty good. It's good to keep in mind, that Prometheus is the second CNCF project that graduated after Kubernetes. So it is very, very mature. And yeah, the Helm charts as well have been there for quite some time. They've been very well built. I would use the Helm charts and having as a basis, and also as a means to keep always up to date with everything that is happening, because there are a lot of things that have been changed in it with Prometheus. Initially, they had Hipster. I don't know how many people know Hipster. They had Hipster as kind of a metrics server. Now Hipster is end of life. They're replacing some of the components with new components now. So it's always better to have the upstream with the Helm chart, so you always get the updated stuff, because things are changing fast. All right, so that's another reason for me to use standardized templates and yeah, deployment methods. I would still take a look at the operator. Side note, it's beta version, but I've used it. It's quite stable, and it will become better. And it really helps you with management and configuration. So you can create service monitors as a CRD. You can create the rules of CRD, new instances of Alert Manager or Prometheus. It really helps with the management of Prometheus itself, and even the setup, because you can have declarative way of everything, of all the configuration. So yeah, I would use Helm at least.
Thank you.
No worries. So after all this, who is going to use Prometheus today? I'm just kidding.
Me, definitely into it.
Great.
Me too, me too.
Yeah, you guys have to, right? It's part of your work. So.
Oh, thanks. You ruined it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. We have a quite lockdown setup, so have to find a workaround.
That's our life as engineers, right?
Yeah, it is what it makes fun, right? But yeah. I can still bitch about it.
Yeah.
It's interesting, actually. I love this.
Yeah, also it has been very interesting for me to set it up and try it with different setups and requirements, trying to find the bottlenecks. I'm happy to see that a lot of them are being addressed the last year by the open source community. Because like 2 or 3 years ago, you had to do a lot of work to really set it up. Now it's also a lot of work, but it's getting better. I'm curious to see more multi-cluster setups. I'm also curious to see if you all have this kind of needs, multi-cluster setup. Because I've seen also the opposite, 5 clusters with five different Prometheus setups, and just, yeah, becomes chaotic. But yeah, any last questions before we close? We're almost 5 minutes before our time, but we have a few more minutes for last questions if you guys have anything else. Of course, I'm sure you have, but questions that we can answer in a few minutes and not go into configuration hell. But yeah.
So I can ask a question. Would there be any reason why you would set up like one Prometheus system which gets all the data, or maybe that you have 2 separate ones, or so for instance, maybe you have one monitoring system that is monitoring just the low-level nodes for CPU, or whether they're working, and then you have a separate system that is monitoring the data of your application, and that could then be encrypted, because that's maybe more needs some more security. Well, the separation of this also allows you to still be not blind. If for instance your apps are failing, and then you can still have the separate monitoring, like the more low-level monitoring system working, maybe, which then is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is a valid reason that you could think that, right? So separating the type of metrics you want, maybe it's host-related metrics or application-related metrics or whatever kind of metrics. However, the downside is that it's not a problem, but you need to consider that if you're going such a way, is that you'll have different Prometheus servers. So you need to be very sure which exporter goes to which Prometheus server, and then also in your dashboarding, you proper data sources and your alerts, proper alerts for every different. So with 2 could be okay. More than 2 starts to become quite difficult to manage the whole thing. And at the end of the day, one of the main reasons why they have this is that you have centralized everything in one server, that you know what is happening. But if there's let's say compliance reason or security reason that you need to really have separation of the metrics, then could make sense. I would keep it simple if it's not absolutely necessary, though. I would keep it still in the same, so you have one source of truth, unless it's absolutely, I don't know, security or really important requirement.
So one system, ideally always try to go for one system, whether it's highly available or not. And yeah, because I was thinking, if you have, for instance, a team that is responsible for the complete clusters, and then you have different teams that are just using the clusters, they are interested in different metrics. And I think it should be independent in some sort of way, so to avoid being completely blind, because
so the way to solve that is having available setup instead of having separate instances, because then if you add the highly availability requirement to this setup, then you need to have 2 highly available different setup Prometheus, right? So it starts to become more difficult to manage. Then I would say definitely then go for highly available setup, but still having same source of truth. What though you can do when you have a highly available setup, you can indeed configure Prometheus that the replicas or the Prometheus servers are not entirely identical. You can still configure it if you want, and the operator makes that easier, that one Prometheus instance scrapes particular things from the other Prometheus instance. So there you can say, okay, I'm scraping only the super secret important data, not everything, and I'm keeping that in this replica, right? But still, the entry point is single, so it's still the same Prometheus setup.
Or maybe you could isolate the nodes that Prometheus is running on. I'm just thinking in chaos, because I've been in situations where if your monitoring isn't working and then there's nasty stuff going on, then you're literally blind and you have to look everywhere. In order
that's
to
why you
solve
need to make sure. You need to
avoid that.
The monitoring is working.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Charlotte. She has to drop out. And thanks for the questions. Also, thanks, Tom. Happy to chat anytime soon with more details about Prometheus. Thanks for joining and the nice comments.
Thank you, Andreas. One last thing. Do you have any repo, anything like that with examples or any?
Yeah, I mean, I have. I can send some links, and maybe Teresa can send it to the whole group about interesting repos or useful repos to have. I have a few of them public, but some of them, I don't, because they were client specific. But I do have some, let's say, repos that they are good to as guidelines or as best practices. Yeah, I can definitely send that over to you guys. I'll send them over to Teresa and then Sam, and they can send it back to the list of people that attended.
Yeah, absolutely. If you share that with me, I will set it up.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Teresa. Good suggestion, David, for sure.
Thank you. Waiting for next session.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to chat anytime. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I really enjoyed our discussion. I hope it gave some clarity about Prometheus and some guidelines. ping us again if you need any more. We can definitely do something that. We are really active with Prometheus in the community. And yeah, hope to see you soon in another session.
Yeah, definitely. If you guys have any questions, send us an email, and I will make sure that the email reaches Andreas, or if you have wishes to speak with somebody else, you can specify that as well. Of course, Andreas is on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Everywhere.
Find him. He's everywhere. Wonderful.
like Prometheus.
Yes. Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining today. Have a good rest of the day, and see you next time.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.